Hello and welcome to the Fishing Guide Podcast. We're lucky enough to be sitting in Southtown Sporting Goods. Larry's here, and we're going to talk about where these fish go in the winter. We're just going to jump right into it. Larry's down here at Southtown Sporting Goods, the owner of it, and so he has a couple degrees, and the good part is he also owns a bait store, and so he knows what those fish are biting, and he knows kind of where they go and puts them together. I'd say that's how that works, right?
Well, a little bit of it, but the fishermen put it together. We just tell them what they want to use, but they're the ones that and there's such a change taking place now with all of this electronics that it's they can go find them in the wintertime. It's the general pattern as we start cooling in the fall. You go through a period of time, and we're right around it now when they kind of come on shore for the last time. There'll be in that period when the temperature goes back to the 60s and mid 50s when they kind of do the reverse of spring. There's a brief period of time when they'll get very active along the shoreline. Then after that, they kind of sound and follow the shad deep. And winter is a great time if you like to fish deep to catch largemouth bass, all the bass, and crappies tend to do the same thing. You just don't catch them up much shallow after that temperature gets in the low 50s, and of course we have winter. That's what we're talking about here. Right. It's an interesting time.
Let's start with largemouth, smallmouth, and Kentuckies. Where do they go in the winter?
They will. A lot of them will suspend deep. Right. And they'll kind of follow those pods of shad. Will go down. They'll lay under those and feed. And this whole life scope thing's opened it up to it's a new world right now. It's a fascinating time for the angler that has the gear, because they can literally see these fish and serious bass tournament fishermen. Some of these young kids are really good at it.
They are good.
They're good with the electronics, and they'll find them, but they'll get off 30, 40 feet deep. Crappie they'll get down there in deep brush, deep cover, and just they're not very active. It's cold, but you can catch them, and they will feed. Sometimes they do funny things. I remember when Beaver was very young. That was in the late 60s. There were a lot of bass, and we had a cold winter where the water temperature got down in the low 40s to upper 30s, and what it was doing was, even though the change was minuscule from day to day, in the middle of the night, some of these shad would seem to become inactive in these pods down deep, and we fished them with spoons, just cast spoons at them, and they would feed up till about 9 o'clock in the morning till the sun got up, and then it seemed like they got enough energy from the sun to kind of right themselves for another day. Wow. But it was great fishing from daylight if you were tough enough to get out there, and the temperatures were cold. It was down on the big end of the lake. They were deep. We don't have the numbers of fish like we had. Those were the
peak
new
years.
year, the peak years, and it was tremendous fishing. But it was 70, 60, 50, 60 years ago now. Wow. But fun times, and that you can still do it, I think, but they've changed so much in the techniques. We see them using a lot of small, kind of soft plastic baits and something with the shiny head where they can get the electronics to spot the bait. Right. And they literally tease these fish. And a good bass fisherman can.
Well, I was going to ask you, what are jerk baits? Are they still popular? What are the ones like here? What style of baits are the most popular?
The jerk baits will come on after the first of the year, as it starts to warm. And this is a good thing for the bass. A lot of the bigger fish seem to become active a little earlier, and they'll move up into that warmer water, just starting to warm, just daylight around a tree or something.
Yeah.
And the jerk baits become really good. Of course, the mega bass are a big one, but you've got the Smithwick Rogues, all the old. Right. And there's a number of new baits that have been built. But the little jerk baits, or some call them stick baits, the jerk baits become very good, just very slow. You fish them, just twitch them. I know some of the fishermen that excuse me, were good at it. They would sometimes wait 10, 20 seconds, for twitching it again. But the fish aren't real active. But that's a January, February, early March fishery when it's starting to warm. But in the midwinter, they're just deep and cold. And I'm excited to see what the anglers do with all the new technology. This is to me, it's an exciting time. They've learned to.
Yeah, they've learned.
They can see them now.
One of the been using the scope eye, the PICO scope eye jig head, and putting the Z-Man
right, just a little
3.5 inch
right, something that mimics a shad
body, and just catching every species that swims.
Everything's out there. They're deep, but it's and it takes a tough guy to go after them. It's cold some days.
So what happens with the stripers? Are they the same?
They're still pretty active.
Following?
They're catching, and we're settling into a winter pattern.
Right.
They'll move up in the river arms. They'll move up where there's more food, and we're selling a good many brood minnows. They're catching stripers right now. The winter bass pattern I don't think is quite going yet.
Oh,
but
right.
And the pressure's very low at that time. We're just not as tough as we used to be. Hate to say it, but
I think they're all out hunting right now.
well,
they're
are.
getting
So
ready to.
They get distracted. and
They're getting ready.
But they'll come back and of course tournaments slow down around Christmas. You got the holidays, but for the person that likes to do it, it'd be a fun time. Just to I missed all the new electronics. I've gotten too old for it, but my goodness.
You just come out in my boat. We'll make it easy for you.
That'd be great. But I'd really like to do that sometime.
And then crappie fishing. What is the deal with crappie and brush in winter?
They just tend to want to get around it. They tend to school. Fish tend to bunch up in the wintertime. And this hunting them, the crappie, if you can find and this can be 20 or 30 feet deep.
Wow.
If they've got a good structure, for whatever reason, they concentrate around those.
Right.
And when I was growing up, this was a long time ago, we had a dock on Grand Lake. It was 40 feet of water. And in the wintertime, it was a phenomenal. We just pour all kind of brush in it.
Right.
And it was a phenomenal crappie fishery, but they would concentrate and stay there. If you can find them, you can go back and harvest them multiple times. But you got to have patience. You got to find them. The distribution becomes, I guess we'd say, kind of poisson or grouped little patches of them, and then they'll find the structure or something they like, and they're there, and you can fish them. It's good.
We better talk about walleye because everyone loves walleyes. Where do people buy? Where do they buy, and what? Where do they? How do you catch a walleye? Get into this winter period.
Well, the walleye are going to move very early to the rivers. The up lake, they're stream spawners.
You mean like January?
January, and people. Some of the good walleye fishermen will get on them early. Most people start looking for them in March.
Right.
But a person would be wise. You can take a large live minnow or you want to fish your bait fairly slow. But some of the deep crankbaits, there are a lot of new soft plastics that I think will fish pretty good for them.
Yeah.
And that's a transitional thing. We're seeing a lot more use of some of these small, soft plastic minnow-like baits.
Right.
Put a shiny head where you can see it, and they're using the live scopes with those too.
Right.
And you can find them and literally tease them up. But the walleye are going to move more toward the river arms as winter. They're migratory, and they'll spawn in the streams. And they'll get up in the upper arms of the lake, and once again, it's a matter of hunting them and finding them, but
they'll all be located towards the bottom, though, right?
Yes, they're going to. They're not going to be up the water column much. They tend to be very, very much attached to the bottom.
And is there like a substrate, like what they like to be around, like pea gravel, or?
Well, they in the streams they're just bottom dwellers. They'll lay on the rocky bottoms.
Yeah.
But I think I don't know. They seem to like a hard substrate. That's for sure.
Right.
And they're finding them and learning to fishing on the summer. They've been out deep. They're out in all long points, but spring and they're the first ones to head for the creeks. They will be, if we get good runoff, a lot of rim flow. Yeah. They'll move very early to the headwaters, and that's really where I would, if I was going to fish them in January or early February, that's where I'd hunt. I really would.
Is there a certain depth?
No,
target on them?
I'd go down to 20 feet for sure.
Right.
But no, if there's a lot of runoff, they'll get in those streams.
Yeah.
In the rivers, just where they'll call it the headwaters, where it's the river's running into the lake.
Right.
And they'll concentrate in those areas.
So is that like .12 area?
Well, probably above that. I would go above 60, the 412 bridge on Beaver. The Kings River.
Right.
But just into the lake. But they'll stage very early. They get in the tailwater below Beaver, below the big dams. That's a good place to look for them. And they'll just get there. That's their
Males run up first.
They're the first. Well, they may all be there, but the males are the ones you see first.
Okay.
And the females come, but they're the earliest spawners. And so, looking for a winter pattern, they're there long before people realize it. And there are few fishermen are good at fishing them. But most people, like you say, it's cold.
It's cold.
It's cold. But and they're tend to be a little nocturnal. If a person's tough enough to set out on a snowy night, might be a great time to catch a good walleye. They're active in very low light, big eyes, and that would be a good winter project for somebody to figure out how to chase them. But go to the headwaters.
If they do, they're not going to tell.
No, they're not going to tell anybody. There's we have customers that are really tough and go out and they catch good walleye, big walleye early.
Yeah.
But you not necessarily like in the Kings River, the White River, not up in the river, but in the headwaters above Hickory Creek, for example.
Right.
And above .12 if you want to look at that.
Right.
But in up to War Eagle, but you just have to hunt them and find them, and they do show up early, and they show up in greater numbers in wet years when you have more runoff.
Right.
They just otherwise they never. I mean, they're not like a salmon where they go back to the same stream.
Right.
They were fishes of the upper Mississippi. They ran up to streams to spawn. They're stream spawners, and they get there way early. They're a cool water fish, and people overlook it. A lot of people start looking for them 6 weeks after they should have been there.
Right.
So it's an early season, but the bass fishing in the winter that's just hunting them deep and hoping you find them.
So, does the water table change like when it gets to a certain temperature? Is there an influx where the water's warmer or colder on the bottom in the winter?
Warmer water is lighter, above 39 degrees, lighter than colder water, so it can run over. But a lot of times in the winter, you'll be playing with snowmelt.
Right.
It's cold. And in the spring, this whole stratification thing starts to set up. It's not set up, but, temperature can have a...
Will that change the one Beaver if they're looking at their electronics, and will there be a line that shows up?
I don't think you would see it. I don't think you would see it that time of year.
Is there a temperature where like largemouth bass and things aren't going to go below that? Like, is there?
I think probably the winter distribution is set by how deep your prey. The shad will ball up and get deep, and they release some of these, particularly in bull shows, 70 or 80 feet down. That's deep. I would hate to fish that deep, but certainly 30 or 40 feet.
Right.
And it probably has something to do with light penetration, and just where the prey. They'll follow those shad down, and the shad get deep in the winter. You don't see them up at the surface.
But sometimes you see them up in the surface on a warm day, and you're against the white bluff, and you
You'll see that. But in the winter, if I was going to fish for bass, I would first hunt the prey, and you can look for birds.
Right.
A lot of days on a warm day, they'll kind of come up, and you'll see seagulls or something.
Yeah.
That's always something, little things in nature that can help you.
Right. There's been a few loons that have been hanging out there at the lake.
They'll be gone when spring comes. They'll go back north. But we always have a few loons on the lake, and
right.
They're an interesting bird. Of course, the cormorants they're fish eaters, and I guess you could look for cormorants, but they. But for whatever reason, the crappie, for example, they tend to get around brush. It could be 15 feet deep if you got good brush.
Right.
You may find them. They get up in the river arms along the edges of the channels where it's cold, but it seems like you want some structure in the wintertime.
Right.
They're not as much free ranging as they are in the summer. So if I was going to fish crappie in the winter, the first thing I do is look for some cover.
Okay.
And then if I had one of the fancy live scopes like you do, I'd see if there were fish in it. If they were, I'd try to catch them.
I've literally on
I know what you do.
All this week I've watched all my bites, all the big stripers that I caught this week. I watched every single one of them bite, and it's just they are pretty good size. I saw a lot of. I think what I'm seeing now is a lot of behavior that I didn't realize. I didn't realize how close some of them are hiding around this one tree, up in this one tree.
Yes.
And the shad come around this one tree, and they come out of nowhere, and they'll just start attacking them when they're next to that tree.
Are you using big Bruner minnows or?
I'm using the PICO scope eye jig head and that Z-Man plastic bait. And
well, those are good. That's a good way to go with it. Yeah.
And spinning rod 8-pound test. I'm having a great time. Murray Lewis, remember him?
Oh yes.
He used to catch the fire out of stripers on the little marabou jig.
Absolutely.
Probably bought him from here.
He made a lot of his own. Yes, he'd put a little trailer on him, but the kids that work for us love to go with him and he never used over a 12-pound line.
Right. Yeah.
Except they're getting the brush, they're going to break off 30. And otherwise, sooner or later, I remember some of the kids that worked for us used to go with him, and they'd get a big one on. Murray, he's taking all my line. He'd say, "Hold your rod up, son." No, you got plenty of line. If they were spooling him, he'd go after them. And there were a lot of big. You're not seeing the huge stripers, are you? 20-pounder's a big one.
Yeah, 20. Yeah. That's in that range. There's the numbers are. For the numbers of big ones, not like back in the early 90s was crazy.
I think there's a pretty good year class or two and that would relate to the wet weather, 7 or 8 pound.
Yeah.
Just nice. I think those probably came from one of the stockings when you had a wet year. Yeah. And it seemed to be quite a lot of them.
It's pretty interesting.
Talking to the guys, they seemed to. But
you always saw Murray was out there in his silver bass cat,
right?
And he would be out there with the spinning rod sitting down, and it was before the time, and he'd be staring at his craft and looking at those schools of shad, and it was just 2D sonar. And
absolutely, and he was good at it. Yeah. But the electronics are a big. You use.
Electronics
are key for your strike.
Jacked up.
Yeah,
especially because I don't use live bait.
Right.
And so you basically you're seeing them all, and you're just chasing shad is what you're doing. And then once you find your shad, you're looking for fish.
But if you were fishing, you'd daylight to 9 in the morning.
Believe it or not,
catch it up in the day.
A real good time is I've been starting about 1.
Really.
And then I get done at dark,
so you've been fishing the last half of the day.
Yeah, the last half of the day, and they start more deeper, and then they get towards the evening. That's when they start coming up.
Sure.
Then you always have that opportunity where they just go nuts and they just start eating on top.
Right.
And you're like,
you still see that in the winter?
Sometimes
rare,
you do. Yeah. It's rare, but a lot of times they won't bust the surface.
Right.
Like they'll swirl.
Right.
But they won't bust the surface.
Right.
Or the schooling action's underneath. So you see them, they're schooling, but they're schooling on their graphs. So, I mean, the big thing I've always gone is always 52 and below. Use brooders or use small baits in general.
Right.
That's where you're going to catch your numbers.
Sure.
And then if you want a big fish, you might use one big, gizzard shad. But you knew that,
But the big
8
ones
or
are
9
a little
pounders.
scarcer now than they have been, aren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's not the numbers, but it's hard for them to grow, and
there's a lot of pressure.
Our population growth has put a lot of pressure on them.
Sure.
I always tell everyone, if our lake was flipped around, if the dam was on this end towards Springdale and the rivers came into the north, that it would be better for a lot of the fish, because when they would go spawn, they would be way up there by Eureka Springs instead of being in Springdale, where the distance to the lake is, 13 miles, where if it was 40 miles, they wouldn't.
They might not get on them as bad, but it's we have this time of year, striper fishing is one of our big draws, and it's brooder minnows. We consistently sell brooder minnows, but they're up here where they can get to them easy, like you say, and they're active. Yeah, and they're good. They're good. This is a good time for them. Do you fish them right on through January?
All the way through the entire time. Go all the way till April.
Right.
About third week of April, then I tell everyone that there's other things to go catch.
Right.
And there's numbers.
Right.
There's your numbers are there, and so it's hard to justify catching 5-6 fish, or
and then
compared to you're out there catching 30 and 40 fish or whatever.
And when you have that big a fish, you're not going to have a whole lot of them on a per acre basis.
Right.
I mean, they're compared to crappie and what they're scarce. So if you're catching them all at 7 or 8 pounds, you're putting pressure on the big ones.
Right.
You're getting a lot of them before they get there. But I just did the conversation this year from some of the guides. It seems like the size is 7, 8, 10 pounds is pretty common. But then a 20-pounder's rare, 30-pounder's mighty rare.
Right.
Yeah. That's but it used to be that those were common when the pressure was low.
Yeah.
And we had back in the
early
30 years
ago. Early 90s, it was,
I mean,
if you brought a 30-pounder into Hickory Creek, and they go, that's nice. A big fish.
Right. But it didn't excite anybody.
Not a a 40, and it's a 30.
It's a good one. The 40 was a good one anytime.
So,
and they would mount a 35-pounder.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But but that's kind of where we are now. You're right on the stripers. It's a good winter. It's a good winter sport. But the bass fishing, it's just difficult. You got a
little more work.
Yeah, sure.
I like spoons and stuff. So I like fishing with the electronics. Always have. So this is good.
If you can find them, it helps a bunch, because they're not evenly distributed right now. Like I said, they're patchy.
That's right.
Poison, the little schools of them. If you can, and you can find them with your gear, you can find them.
Yep. Well, that takes us to Tackle Time. Tackle Time sponsored by PICO Lures. Of course, I just talked about scope-eyed jig heads that they make, and of course they're available here. What makes them special is they have a large head. They got a reflective eye, so they show up really good on forward-facing sonar. And they have a wire keeper, so your bait lasts longer. Larry doesn't want to hear that, but your bait will last longer. Your soft plastic, so you get to use more times, catch more fish, and so that's good. But they got everything from walleye. You can catch walleye or crappie or all that on. So you can check them out at PICOLures.com, or you can come in here to Southtown, and they have PICO Lures. You can buy them here. Larry, if they wanted to come into Southtown, where would they go?
What do you mean? Where would they go?
Come here. Yeah. But I mean, where are you located?
Oh, I'm sorry. We're at 4602 North College in Fayetteville. It's just north of the Northwest Arkansas Mall, right next to Locomotion, east side of the highway on Business 71. So,
and I have put a punch in too real quick is they had a lot of people talking about IA and all this and how technology is going to help them buy their fishing lures, that the computer can help them and they can put this in and that in, but nothing beats having someone that has experience about the reservoir that you're fishing, no matter what tackle shop that you're talking, brick and mortar, where people have been there a while, like Southtown or Hook, Line, and Sinker. Make sure you go this year and skip the big marts and come to the places where they have the people that are up front helping and working, and they live in the community, and it's about the community. So make sure you check them out, because that's what it's all about. And they have all the products you need, and they have the people up front that can help you get the right product. With that,
that's good. Thank you.
Yep, we're going to end this show. Make sure you keep your hook sharp and your lures in the water.